Hi. Ever since cloud came into picture, probably in the around 2007, 2008 timeframe, we are talking about programmatic access to infrastructure. And infrastructure as code has gained quite a bit of traction in the last decade. Today, we are going to talk about infrastructure as code, its limitations, and what we can do with infrastructure as code in terms of operationalizing the entire infrastructure and more. I have a couple of guests coming in to discuss this topic, and let's get started. Hi, my name is Krish Subramanian, and I am Chief Research Advisor at Richie.Research. I am today going to talk with two more guests who are joining the show to talk about infrastructure as code. So let me introduce both Pradeep as well as Mark, who are joining me today to discuss the topic, and we'll get started on our discussion. Pradeep and Mark, can you introduce yourself, and we'll go from there.
Sure. I'll start, Pradeep. Hey, I'm Troester. I work for Progress, who acquired Chef, and it's really great to be here. I head up what we call the VP of Strategy, so I work a lot with our overall go-to-market. We have a set of products that cuts across app dev from front end to back end, and now with the addition of Devops with Chef, that kind of rounds out our application portfolio. So I work a lot with the new companies that we work with, and it's great to be here and spend some time with you all.
Yeah. Pradeep? Thanks, Mark. Yeah. Hey guys, this is Pradeep Padala. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Filament. We are working on a cloud workflow automation platform, and we are coming at it with a very unique perspective of building and running workflows with low code, where you can build it visually, and we help you run it in a SaaS platform, so you don't have to manage all the complexity of different systems. In the past, I was the CTO and co-founder of a company called ContainerX, which was acquired by Cisco. Have spent quite a bit of time in the infrastructure space, have seen various inflection points. Would love to talk about infrastructure as code today, and thanks, Krish, for inviting me.
Awesome. I think let's set some context and then we will go from there. In my opinion, cloud unleashed programmatic access to infrastructure, and in the early days, Chef and later Ansible and other platforms sort of like made it easy to access provision infrastructure using code. And that sort of kickstarted the infrastructure as code trend, which is being embraced by enterprises in large numbers today. And later on with Kubernetes and this trend accelerated, but soon developers and IT operations, they faced with a lot of complexities like YAML complexity and few others. So companies like Pulumi, which actually raised Series B today, congratulations. So companies like Pulumi tried to tackle the YAML complexity by sort of like letting developers use their own programming languages to handle infrastructure, but that didn't solve the problem completely. So I think in today's discussion, we are going to discuss about how this infrastructure as code trend has evolved from the early days, and what are its limitations, and how can we handle something like YAML complexity. Of course, Pulumi has its own way of doing it. I would like to hear from you how your customers are doing it. We'll set some context, lay out the landscape, and then get going.
Mm-hmm. Mark, I'll take a quick crack at it. So Krish, I mean, we all have seen infrastructure for a while now. There's been very interesting trends. Of course, Chef and Puppet were the very first infrastructure as code solutions, and today we have Terraform, Ansible, and a few others. And of course, Kubernetes, how we deploy using YAML, but an HCL high-level language, right? So the biggest challenge I see as I talk to customers is that someone has to still write those configuration scripts, or whatever you want to call it, recipes, in case of Chef, and Kubernetes YAML files. And that adds up as you build your infrastructure and as you maintain it over time. So I see biggest challenge as deployment is very well solved today. If you pick Terraform and Ansible as the tools, and maybe Chef and Puppet as well, then but day end operations, what comes after that is still in its infancy. So that's how I see as the biggest challenge. And I would pause there. Mark and Krish, any comments there?
Yeah, no, I think that makes a lot of sense. My perspective has been more from the app dev side. So I don't have professional experience in terms of running operations teams. So I'll look at a lot of the challenges from the app dev side, which, is really kind of both sides of the DevOps piece. So it's, important for the app dev team to be able to do things very effectively, very quickly. I mean, we're making great strides in terms of agile development, but if you can't keep up with management of the infrastructure, then obviously that's the driving factor behind DevOps. So I'd agree with what you said that, that there is a lot of transition. I know that from a Chef point of view, we're always working to make things as easy as possible. And if you think about everything that we do in the technology space, that's really what it's about, right? Even before low code and no code on the app dev side, there was 4GLs, and it was all about making the developers more effective. But I think what's really important is to make sure that the technologies that they use, fit within, their construct or the different tools that they use versus having to kind of throw everything out and start over.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about making it easy for developers to sort of provision and maybe operationalize infrastructure, which we will be talking later. So how do you think developers can do it? Like, do you think there is a skills gap there where developers they have to train themselves up to handle infrastructure? I know in Silicon Valley, probably you have plenty of developers who could handle the infrastructure side, but when you go to other places, you're not going to find developers who are comfortable doing the IT operations either with code or in some other form using its even UI. It's going to be tough for developers to handle it. So is the skills gap going to be a problem for organizations?
I mean, I'll jump in first, but I think a lot of it is we need to work towards a self-service model, right? I don't think we need to eliminate IT ops and train every developer to be an IT ops professional because, as you said, it's too much to take on. We need to be able to focus on, the right skill set for the right job. So I think a lot of it is making sure that, DevOps comes together. There's the right level of collaboration. You have the right professionals that are setting things up so that when dev needs to do something, that they can do those things, kind of with a push of the button versus, picking up the phone or sending a Slack message or whatever and getting somebody on the IT ops to actually allow them to promote code or to get an environment ready for them to test or to move into production.
So probably you're talking about more automation and probably making it easy for the dev team and ops team to work. So Pradeep, Mark brought up an interesting topic from the point of view of developers. He talked about how abstraction has led to low code or no code kind of a scenario. Do you expect something like that to happen at the infrastructure level, especially to tackle some of the complexities that comes with the infrastructure as code?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the bottleneck here is code, right? Infrastructure as code is awesome. We want to abstract infrastructure at a level where it's easy to interact with it, change objects, manage state, and so on. But someone has to write code to do infrastructure as code, right? So the code could be like in Python, JavaScript, or other languages. Pulumi is doing a great job there in making it easy. Or it could be like an HCL high-level language, like Terraform and Chef recipe language. But either way, someone has to write that code and maintain it. So I see that what's happening in business process automation, where there are no-code platforms or tools, where like UiPath and a few other companies are doing very good job. We can bring the same kind of interface and ease of use for infrastructure operations folks. And as Mark said, it won't be like everyone becomes like a software engineer who can operate infrastructure. There will be infrastructure developers who will be proficient in languages and building products that make it easy to do monitoring, analysis of infrastructure, and so on. But I think we have to get more people into this work in terms of managing infrastructure. Everyone doesn't have to know every nitty-gritty detail of APIs and so on. They need to be proficient in operating the cloud and workloads that they're responsible for. So I think we can do it, but at the same time, we don't want to dumb it down or stop people from writing code. Whenever we mention or other folks mention no code or low code, people think that there is a visual interface that will make everything, that will hide details. But we are working with folks who want to operate their infrastructure at a low level. These two are not conflicting. So let's make it easy, but at the same time, you can access underlying code as well. So that's how we feel about that.
I think that's a great response, Pradeep. I like the fact that, we recognize that code's a great thing, right? But we want to be able to minimize the effort that it takes to write that code. And, from the low code point of view, you also point out that I know when I was working with technologies on the app dev side, whether it's a Salesforce or Force.com or Mendex or Coney or any one of those low code platforms, there's always pushback from the professional developers because it's too much of a black box, right? So I like the fact that if you can kind of marry that low code capability or something that will allow the developer or IT ops person to do something very quickly, but not to limit what they can do, because we're working with enterprises that we have an enterprise right now that has actually scanned 8.5 million nodes across different clouds, Azure, AWS, and GCP. And to be able to do that, requires sophisticated knowledge. And then if you go beyond kind of the developer ops and implementation piece to the deployment piece, to think more about compliance and what you need to be able to do compliance and stuff like that, it really becomes important to be able to have complete control and not be limited by, a drag and drop
Exactly.
helping starting point. So that's perspective.
Just quickly to jump in, I think one good example is Webflow for building websites and web apps as well, right? For a long time, like doing this drag and drop websites created HTML and CSS that was ugly and it's hard to manage. But Webflow has done a great job. So it creates the least amount of CSS or HTML or JavaScript needed to build a website, and you can completely edit it without using a Webflow, right? So you can just use your editor, IDE, whatever you use. I think the time has come where we can build tools similar to Webflow, but for SRE and Devops people, infrastructure ops people. It's an exciting time, I think.
Definitely.
Yeah, awesome. Let's now take a step forward and go beyond provisioning the infrastructure, because most of the discussion or most of the tools, I would say, in the early days, it focused on infrastructure provisioning. But for most enterprises, provisioning the infrastructure is just the first step. What about day two operations? What about governance? All those things matter from when you look at it from an enterprise point of view. So if you are going with an infrastructure as a code approach, how are we going to operationalize the infrastructure using code, whether it's low code or using Pulumi kind of a model, like where Python or JavaScript, whatever you want to use, or Chef, Puppet, and Terraform kind of a model? How are we going to operationalize the entire infrastructure beyond day one into day two?
Pradeep, do you want to start?
Yeah, sure. Go ahead. Or I can talk first. So I think the keyword is policy. So once you deploy, you kind of know, or when you start deploying, you start with a blueprint Terraform has its templates, and everything looks nice. But over time, as new code comes in, the new product code comes in, new services are added. Maybe you add database in RDS or other services. Then you have to update your policy or the original blueprint. There isn't a single tool that actually does it today that easily, but that's conceptually that's what we have to do, and I think people are still figuring out like how to do it effectively. The second part is applying those new changes. Let's say my policy says I need more VMs in a cluster. Very simple policy, right? But what does that mean? Which kind of VM? Who can deploy it? And what kind of approvals are needed? And where do you deploy them? And who determines on-call or who does on-call for this? So we call it a workflow. So a workflow is needed to manage the life cycle of all these changes. So I think workflow management will take place where we can codify all these things in a workflow, hopefully, and then apply that policy and make those changes in infrastructure for real. So I think that's one way to solve it. I'm sure it's a pretty complex topic. So there are other solutions as well, I think.
Mark, you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think similar response. I mean, everybody knows how Chef has a library or access to, what we call content that is CIS enabled, and we make sure that it stays up to date, and that in effect can kind of start, the idea of a policy. And then obviously being able to kind of define it once and then run it anywhere so that you can, you don't have to do something specific for every different environment that you're deploying to. It also, I think, is an important part of being successful.
Awesome. So with COVID, almost every organization is forced to rethink their strategy. So enterprise modernization is becoming the norm today than probably something they aspire to do. So COVID is sort of pushing every organization to modernize their infrastructure. So as a part of that, infrastructure as code is getting a lot of attention. How you can programmatically procure infrastructure, how you can manage it, and probably do governance and other stuff, enforce policies, do governance, handle security, everything through code. So this is becoming the norm. So as enterprises try to modernize themselves in this COVID era, what are some of the considerations they should take into account as they try to modernize? Can you sort of lay out some of the things they should take into account as they go about in their modernization process?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's important to really think holistically. You can make, stepwise improvements in any certain aspect of the life cycle of app dev. But if you think more holistically, I think you have a better chance of being successful. So that's where, the architects need to come in. They need to think beyond a specific domain to think, how can we increase velocity? How can we increase speed? How can we deliver more capabilities? Because you're right, with COVID and, everything COVID related and cloud and now more regulatory requirements that need to be met, it's a perfect storm in terms of being able to do that. And now with everything, being supported offline, you need to be able to not only help your employees who are working at home, but to engage with your customers more effectively digitally. So I think from a macro perspective, it's really looking across all elements of the application development, deployment, and management, and look for opportunities to improve.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I totally agree. I think holistic way of looking at whole infrastructure and apps being deployed. I think one thing I might add is automation. The reason for that is that we all know that digitization is accelerating. Every company is looking at offering services online digitally to their customers because of COVID, or people have realized that this is cheaper and more efficient in some cases. So better offer services online. But to do that, they suddenly are they're learning a lot of new things. How do you run these apps in public cloud or private cloud? How do I set up an operations team? And many companies that are traditionally, even companies that have done a SaaS offering, still are figuring out how to do this at 2x scale digitally, or maybe 5x scale if they're good and seeing a boom in new things, right? So that's where automation comes into picture. And the way I define automation is that it's not just about scripts. It's not just about running a few things. It's more about policies and workflows and how you apply the changes across the infrastructure in a uniform way. And so it's more about workflow automation rather than just running point scripts that solve certain problems. So that's where I think world is heading, and everyone is realizing benefits of automation as well. But it takes time. It takes time to adopt some of these things, some of these technologies to automate and so on.
Yeah, automation is definitely a critical component, but just maybe automating a few things or even defining policies and maybe setting up a set of rules to handle the automation, it's not going to work in today's world, right? Like we need to sort of figure out a way to tap into all the observability data that's coming in,
Yes.
and probably use it as a feedback to drive better automation or maybe take appropriate actions at appropriate time, so that you could not only stop the kind of failures that you know is going to happen when something breaks down, but you can also stop grave failures. So for that, I think taking advantage of machine learning is the right way to do it. So do you have any thoughts on how that can be done and how we can make intelligent automation in handling the infrastructure so that it's sort of goes in an autopilot kind of a mode?
Yeah, I mean that's a very good point, Krish. Yes, you want to apply a policy and make changes, but to do that you need information. So I kind of think of it as a control loop where you have monitor, analyze, and then remediate, right? And then you go back to monitoring. So it's a very well-known loop. It's used in many different places, not just in computer systems, right? So in that, there is a lot of improvement. Monitoring, we have Datadog and other tools. Of course, analysis, we have a lot more analysis that we can do today with Splunk, again, with Datadog and other tools. And remediate, I guess it's still progressing in terms of like how we do it. Now, in terms of machine learning, I see it as a tool rather than being the final solution, right? So the tool to do root cause analysis better, a tool to determine anomalies in your monitoring data, a tool to like figure out if your policies are good, actually, right? So those kind of things, I think it will definitely help. And a platform that can use it in an, like you said, intelligent way and provide automation would be very good for today's world and or in the future.
Yeah, and I think to add on to that, I think a lot of what Pradeep said is I definitely agree with. Yeah, and I think he made the distinction about data that's coming in that we can determine, and use that to apply analytics. And he mentioned, different tools that can be used alongside his solution. Same with us. So we're able to use what we call data tap to be able to pull data in and analyze it. And I think anything can be done with that. We just need to spend more time in terms of developing algorithms that would allow us to tease out insight to be able to, say, hey, if you're in this situation based on what we've seen historically, then maybe this is the right thing to do. And then in addition to that, being able to use analytics to analyze machine data from, those machines and servers and everything that's under management to look for, potential to do predictive analytics or predictive maintenance so that you can, eliminate downtime would be a couple of areas that we think machine learning and AI could be applied to.
Okay. So I know you both have some announcements to make. Before we go there, let's sort of like use human intelligence to make some predictions 3 to 5 years from now. So where do you expect infrastructure as code going in the next 3 to 5 years?
Okay. I mean, I think, there's a lot of hype around some of these technologies, and quite frankly, in 3 to 5 years, if I thought 90% of the organizations could actually get to achieve the benefits that we're espousing today, that would be an awesome thing, and that would not require any new technologies. It would just require people being able to implement them more effectively. So that's what I'd like to see. In terms of something more interesting, I'd also like to see that and we're seeing this, right? We've gone from DevOps to DevSecOps. We're certainly bringing compliance and security into that. I think thoughtful organizations are also thinking about how can they automate QA. So if you think about everything that's involved in bringing applications to life, if you automate 90% of it, then you're going to have 10% that's going to be a gating factor, and it could take you 3 weeks to do that. So, thinking about every different aspect of what has to be done and to automate as much as possible, I think is really important. And then, also I would even bring that as far left as the designers, right? So now, there's some interesting aspects around design ops where, designers, have the same issues as developers working with IT ops. So designers and developers sometimes don't work together that well because left brain, right brain, they're using different sets of tools, and how do they do all this stuff together? So kind of at a macro level, I would like to see just, people be more successful based on what technologies are available today, and then to expand the notion of DevOps to include all the different disciplines and to make sure that there's as much automation and collaboration as possible is what I'd like to see.
Pradeep?
Yeah, I'll take a maybe more like a holy grail picture, I guess, or what I wish for, right? So I think if we do a few things well, eventually Dev and Ops should merge. And this is happening obviously in many cloud native companies and web scale companies already. The people who write product, the people who operate infrastructure and workloads running on that infrastructure, they're not that different. And there is this new term, cloud engineer, coming up more often now. Pulumi, I think in their announcement, they talked about it. And I know the founders as well. So a cloud engineer is managing infrastructure, but they're writing code just like a product developer who's writing, let's say, a mobile app or a product functionality, like let's say a recommendation engine, things like that. I think that gap will reduce quite a bit, and this acceleration of digitization will help in that, because we are realizing that it's all about code, but how do we make it easier to code, whether with no code or easier libraries and higher level languages, Pulumi, Terraform, all of that. But with that, I think there will be more software engineers, more maybe even non-software engineers who will get into what we are calling as ops and DevOps, right? I think there will be a merging of Dev and Ops, and hopefully we'll have just one engineer or one type of engineer who can manage infrastructure and write product as well. That's the wish, but we'll see how it evolves.
Awesome. Yeah, I think I probably agree with both of you on this. First, we are talking a lot about all these new trends, but people have to use, as Mark said. And I also see the merging of roles between Dev and Ops. That is also going to happen. And maybe not in the next 3 to 5 years, probably another 10 years or so, we will have more autonomous kind of an IT scenario. We will maybe self-driving car equivalent to for IT operations might emerge, and probably. Yeah, now I am hallucinating, but probably that's a possibility. Yeah. So we are almost coming close to the end of the show. So I know you both have some announcements to make. So I would like you to talk about the announcements.
Pradeep, please go ahead first.
Yeah, sure. We are, so I want a quick, brief intro, 30-second intro about our company. So at Filament, we are building our cloud automation platform, a workflow automation platform to manage cloud infrastructure. So And one interesting aspect is that we have a no-code or low-code interface to build those workflows, and you can still build workflows in code as well. So we are approaching our 1.0 GA release, and we'll be releasing very soon. We'll have more announcement later. I cannot talk about all the details at this point, but stay tuned. End of November or so, we want to reveal more details about our upcoming product launch.
Mark?
Okay, thanks. Well, first of all, just a little bit about Progress. We're really excited to have Chef join Progress, and we're going to continue a very, very strong commitment to open source. We're going to speed innovation. We're going to double down in terms of innovation and roadmap capabilities. So we're really excited about all of that. Today, actually, we dropped a press release around some new capabilities. And one of it is really kind of talking about what we talked about today, is just making things easier. So we're providing what we call workload-aligned solutions or offerings around both application management, infrastructure management, and then compliance management. So those are capabilities that we're bringing to market. We have new capabilities that are really helping us speed the amount of time it takes, or reduce the amount of time it takes to do deployment, production, and things like that. Things as low as lazy loading of modules. We're working a lot in terms of cloud target scanning. I mentioned an organization that scans more than 8.5 million devices or nodes. And so that's something that we now are able to do in terms of performance and scalability. And then we continue to work in terms of making integrations into, things like ITSM, CMDB, Splunk, and things like that. And we also have made it really easy for people to leverage our content. And so we have cloud access to a library of CIS certified premium content that we have an SLA on. So if those things change, then we'll get them changed very quickly. We've also introduced what we call a skills validation program using the Open Badges standard. And so it's just another way for the community to learn and to use Chef, and it's also good for our partners as well. So really excited about the announcement. You can learn more at chef.io, and it's been great sharing some time with you guys today.
Awesome. It was a great conversation, and thanks to both of you for taking time and coming in such a short notice. And I appreciate your time talking about the infrastructure as code, and probably we will come back another day in the future to discuss more deeply about your platforms and all the details that will be of more value to customers. So thank you very much.
Absolutely, Krish. Thanks.